Hello and welcome to Instant Insights. I'm Jordan Strzelecki, an analyst in GlobalData's Strategic Intelligence team. At GlobalData Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. In today's episode, we're going to look at tech regulation, including the lessons to learn based on its implementation to date and the future challenges lying ahead in this space. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by my colleagues Laura Petrone and Beyza Karakoy. Laura and then Beyza, could you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Sure. Hi, Jordan, and hi, everyone. I'm Laura Petrone, Principal Analyst in the Strategic Intelligence team here in GlobalData. And in the team, I lead the research on tech regulation. I recently published a report on the current AI regulatory landscape and a recent one on online safety for children. So these are my main research interests at the moment.
Hi, my name is Beyza. I'm a senior analyst in the strategic intelligence team at GlobalData. I specialize in research on data privacy, legal tech, and reg tech. It's great to join you today to share some of my insights.
Brilliant. Thank you both. So I guess let's kick off. So now, for all of you, our listeners, you'll probably have some kind of surface level knowledge about what tech regulation is. But to kick off our discussion, Laura, can you please provide a high level overview of exactly what tech regulation encompasses?
So we can think of tech regulation as an umbrella term covering different areas of the digital economy where regulators have been acting over the past 2 decades or so to ensure technology benefits society as a whole. And in global data, we identified 10 different arenas. Just to name a few examples, we are talking about antitrust, for example, which is about making sure that businesses compete fairly. But also we talk about online safety, which wants to make sure that online platforms are responsible for the content they promote, the consequences of any possible harmful content. And now there is a lot of talks about AI ethics and regulation, and rightly so, considering the risks associated with this technology. So, all these are arenas where regulators around the world have been scrutinizing companies with different levels of success. And we believe that data privacy, antitrust, online harm, and AI ethics will attract the greatest scrutiny over the next few years. And this is because these are all key areas when it comes to ensure a safe and efficient digital economy. We know that technology plays an important role today when it comes to generate growth in this era of great economic uncertainty. But we also know that the pace of innovation in some areas like artificial intelligence or digital health, in these areas, the pace of innovation also creates unprecedented risks to society. So this is about what tech regulation covers. When it comes to what are the main targets of this regulation, we've produced extensive research in these different areas of tech regulation. And one of the main findings is that big tech companies face and will face in the future the highest regulatory risk. That they are the companies who have faced the strongest scrutiny and have been fined the most by regulators on things like data privacy, for example, which is the most established area of regulation, as Beyza will outline. And on things like antitrust, there have been a lot of fines on these areas as well. At the moment, big tech faces enormous risk when it comes to AI regulation, because this is a technology where big tech has a lot at stake and where big tech companies in particular are deemed responsible for assessing and mitigating possible risk coming from the adoption of artificial intelligence. So this is, in a nutshell, what tech regulation is. The big challenge today is to make sure tech regulation fit for the digital economy without hampering innovation. And obviously, this is not an easy task, but one that regulators are seeking to grasp.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think that's a great summary of what tech regulation is. So I guess if we kind of move from what the main areas of tech regulation are to its relevance today, we've seen the world's biggest economy, the US, seemingly embark on a deregulatory drive under President Trump. For example, one of Trump's early executive actions in his first few days of his second term in office was revoking President Biden's AI executive order, which means, among other things, that AI companies no longer need to report safety testing results for large-scale AI models. So, Laura, to what extent would you say tech regulation is still relevant today against such a backdrop?
I'd say that it's more relevant than ever before. And this is because technology is embedded in so many aspects of our daily lives. Digital transformation is also a top priority for businesses um, around the world. But there will always be a need to make sure that technology brings benefits to society. So just as an example, just look at the current debate on online safety. So you have digital technologies like social media platforms that have become an integral part of young people's lives. They present lots of benefits to young people, they can express themselves, they can connect to family and friends, but they also present risks, including the risk of exposing young people to harmful and sometimes illegal content. And this to the point that online safety today has become a key issue for governments and for legislators around the world. Regulation is also vital to really harness the benefits of a technology. So artificial intelligence is a good example of this. When it comes to developing AI, this creates obviously ethical challenges and it poses security risks. So the role of regulation is to identify and mitigate these risks, but it's also fundamental in providing legal certainty for businesses that need to make investment decisions on artificial intelligence. And a lack of this regulation can discourage investments in the long term. And my final point, and also to answer your question about the US deregulation, the US is moving towards the regulation on artificial intelligence, and this is definitely a divergent path with respect to the one that the EU is following with the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. And it's true that Trump has revoked the Biden executive order, which represented the only comprehensive AI governance approach in the US. But it's also true that now we are seeing that in the absence of a federal AI legislation, US states are taking a more active role in introducing and in enacting state level legislation. So you have the states of California, of Colorado, and Utah who have all signed AI legislations recently, and many other states have followed suit. And this is because despite this deregulation trend, the risks of AI and of irresponsible practices associated with AI are all very much present. And look at the current race towards the release of ever more powerful models. So in this context, legislators in US think that it's absolutely critical to act because we can't rely on self-regulation alone.
Okay, great. If we pivot back a bit, so in the answer to our first question, Lara, you mentioned data privacy being one of the most developed areas of tech regulation. Beyza, can you just expand on the achievements in this area and the lessons we can draw from them?
Data privacy has indeed emerged as the most developed and mature area of tech regulation, and much of that progress can be traced back to the impact of the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Since its implementation in 2018, the GDPR has fundamentally reshaped how companies approach user data, not just in Europe, but globally. It's a great example of what's often referred to as the Brussels effect, where the EU, by virtue of its market size, ends up exporting its standards to the rest of the world. Over the years, we've seen many jurisdictions take cues from the GDPR. So countries like Brazil, Japan, and states like California have developed laws that reflect similar principles. But beyond its influence, what's important is its practical impact. Regulators across the EU have made decisions in thousands of cases, giving businesses clearer guidance on how to handle personal data responsibly. In 2024 alone, total fines under the GDPR hit around 1.2 billion euros, and that's actually lower than the 2.1 billion euros recorded in 2023, which was mainly due to a single record-setting fine against Meta. So Meta was hit with a 1.2 billion euro fine for violating privacy laws by transferring Facebook user data to servers in the United States. These enforcement actions have shown that regulators are willing to hold even the biggest players accountable, and that accountability is changing the way companies operate, especially those built on ad-funded models like Meta, Google, and ByteDance. Their business models rely heavily on collecting and analyzing user data to deliver targeted advertising, which has raised concerns about how far that data use can go. In response to growing regulatory pressure and public awareness, we've seen some big shifts. Apple rolled out its app tracking transparency feature in 2021, giving users the option to opt out of cross-app tracking. That had a major impact on companies like Meta and Snap, who rely on granular user data for ad targeting. And more recently, in 2024, Google reversed course on its plan to eliminate third-party cookies in Chrome. Instead, it's focusing on giving users more control by making it easier to opt out of tracking, a move that reflects the ongoing tension between user privacy, advertising needs, and regulatory expectations. There are a few key lessons to take from all this. First, strong regulation can work, but only if it's actively enforced and keeps pace with how technology evolves. Secondly, we're seeing a shift in what's considered acceptable when it comes to data practices. People are more aware of their rights, and trust is becoming a competitive differentiator for companies. And finally, as the industry moves towards a post-cookie world, those companies that embrace privacy by design, invest in alternative targeting methods, and build transparent, trust-based relationships with users are the ones that will be best positioned for the future. This shift in data privacy isn't just about legal compliance. It's also about resetting the terms of digital trust. And that's one of the most meaningful developments we've seen in tech regulation in the past decade.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the major issues in data privacy today is the lack of consistency across jurisdictions. So, Beyza, how is this regulatory fragmentation playing out around the world, and what kinds of challenges is it creating for businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one of the most complex realities companies are dealing with today. The global data privacy landscape is incredibly fragmented, and that lack of consistency is forcing businesses to juggle overlapping and sometimes conflicting regulatory requirements. If we start with the United States, unlike the EU, which has a single unified framework in the GDPR, the US still does not have a federal data privacy law. That gap has led to the rise of state-level laws, and now around 20 US states have passed their own privacy legislation. These vary widely in scope and enforcement, which means a company operating nationally might need to comply with multiple, sometimes incompatible legal standards. The American Data Privacy and Protection Act, which was introduced in 2022, aimed to harmonize these rules by setting clear limits on how data could be collected, processed, and shared, but it ultimately stalled in Congress and hasn't gained momentum since. So for now, the patchwork remains, and for businesses, that means higher compliance costs, more legal uncertainty, and complex privacy programs that need to scale across jurisdictions. This fragmentation extends globally, and in many countries, data privacy rules are increasingly tied to national security concerns. Take China, for example. Under the Personal Information Protection Law, companies face strict rules when transferring data overseas. Depending on the volume or sensitivity of the data, transfers may require a government security assessment. The law places significant obligations on both local and international companies operating in the Chinese market. Russia enforces strict data localization rules requiring that personal data of Russian citizens be stored on servers physically located within Russia, and companies must also register with Russian authorities. And there are real enforcement risks, including fines or service bans. In India, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act was passed in August 2023. It has extraterritorial reach similar to the GDPR and introduces principles around consent, purpose limitation, and data minimization. However, as of today, the law is not yet fully operational. The Indian government is still finalizing rules, including how cross-border data transfers will be handled. Proposals to restrict transfers to trusted countries are under consultation, but not yet finalized. Now, for companies transferring data between the EU and the US, the situation has improved. In July 2023, the two sides reached a new agreement, the EU-US Data Privacy Framework, and this framework reinstated legal grounds for transatlantic data flows after the invalidation of the Privacy Shield. A key feature is the establishment of a Data Protection Review Court in the US, which gives EU citizens a mechanism to challenge government access to their data. The European Commission conducted its first review of the framework in late 2024 and confirmed progress in implementation. And that said, the agreement still faces legal scrutiny, especially in European courts. So while it's offering stability at the moment, there's no guarantee that it will survive future challenges. Companies are being advised to continue monitoring legal developments and maintain fallback options like standard contractual clauses. So what does all of this mean in practice? Companies operating internationally can't rely on a single global standard. They need tailored approaches, localized expertise, and the ability to adapt quickly to regulatory shifts. Cross-border data transfers are especially tricky, and in places where regulation is entangled with national security like China or Russia, there are added geopolitical risks. Ultimately, the lack of global alignment means privacy compliance is now a strategic issue, not just a legal one. Organizations that invest in adaptive frameworks, regional expertise, and long-term trust with consumers will be in the best position to manage this fragmented and fast-changing environment.
Now, if we look at AI in the realm of data privacy specifically, Beyza, I'm going to come to you again. What do you see as the most serious data privacy risks posed by this technology?
AI, particularly generative AI, presents some of the most serious data privacy challenges we've seen in recent years. These systems are trained on enormous volumes of data, much of it scraped from across the internet. That data often includes personal information, sometimes collected without individuals' consent or even knowledge. Because the training process is opaque, it's difficult to know exactly what data has been used, let alone whether it complies with existing privacy laws. The problem is that most privacy legislation was developed before this type of technology existed. Frameworks like the EU's GDPR set clear rules for collecting, processing, and storing personal data, but applying those principles to complex AI models raises unresolved questions. For example, it's still unclear how to meet requirements like data minimization or the right to be forgotten when personal data is embedded in a model's training set. We've seen how this has played out in practice. In 2023, Italy's Data Protection Authority temporarily restricted access to ChatGPT over concerns about GDPR compliance. Since then, scrutiny around generative AI and privacy has only increased, and in 2024, the EU formally implemented the EU AI Act, showing that privacy risks linked to AI are now being taken seriously at the highest regulatory levels. In response, companies are rethinking how they handle personal data. Many are investing in privacy-enhancing technologies, including encryption, synthetic data, and techniques to minimize the exposure of identifiable information. These steps help reduce both legal and reputational risks, while still allowing AI systems to operate effectively. In short, the most serious data privacy risks from AI come from the scale and opacity of data collection, the lack of consent in training practices, and the gaps in current legal protections. These risks are compounded by the speed of innovation. But as regulation continues to evolve, the organizations that move early to align their AI strategies with emerging privacy standards will be far better positioned, both to remain compliant and to build long-term trust.
Great, thank you. So for our final question, Laura, what lessons can we learn on future regulation on data privacy with regards to AI?
Well, I'd say at least two lessons. So the first one is that different approaches emerging worldwide are inevitable because often they reflect specific regions, specific countries' interests at stake and cultures. So in the case of artificial intelligence, we already seen different visions of regulation shaping up. For example, we can say that broadly speaking, the European Union's approach that's reflected in the EU AI Act. So this approach aims to protect the consumer, but then you have other countries like the US, UK, and Japan following an approach which prioritizes protecting businesses, particularly AI companies. And then on the other hand, you had countries like China, where AI regulation seeks to protect the government. Despite the different visions, it's important to stress the commonalities and the fact that AI has become a major concern worldwide, and that we need to work together towards, achieving harmonized norms and standards. So, for example, we can see that despite all these differences, safety has become a major concern worldwide, and safety concerns, in particular around powerful models, are increasingly being reflected in the emphasis some AI legislations put on targeted these models, the biggest large language models. And then I'd say another important lesson to learn is that, as in the case of data privacy, this debate on AI regulation and how much regulation is needed is often framed in a regulation versus innovation dichotomy. But actually, there's no evidence that a higher level of regulation is detrimental to innovation, because if you think of the EU, both the EU and China are key players in artificial intelligence. And at the same time, they are shaping the AI regulatory agenda. So in my view, this is a false dichotomy. What is true is that regulation can accelerate AI adoption, it can provide legal certainty, it can, most importantly, it can enhance public trust. And yeah, it's true that this is a time when the AI industry, but also governments and legislators around the world are considering a pause on regulation, a sort of pause of contemplation, especially at the European Union level, for different reasons, also because of some industry pressure. So they want a pause to see whether regulation has gone too far, or whether it has become too cumbersome for businesses. But despite this pause, I think organizations, companies should really consider risk assessment of their AI systems as urgent as before, because in the end, AI risks have not gone away. Companies need to continue to align with best practices on artificial intelligence, on AI governance, because in the end, an ethical and responsible approach to AI is emerging worldwide, despite all the differences. And so this is really the path forward.
Great, thank you. Now, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. So thank you, Laura and Beyza, for joining on today's podcast on tech regulation. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about how global data strategic intelligence can help your companies, you can reach out to us at customersuccess.strategic@globaldata.com. Thank you very much and see you next time.